Hey Jim, welcome back to another aesthetic imaging video tutorial. Last week I made the announcement that I'm going to be changing the channel name to AIP Tutorials, and that is still a go, so in April we will be AIP Tutorials. Nothing else is going to change besides that, so there you have it. As I promised last week, we'll be doing CC Radial Blur today. As usual, the project files will be available to download. I'll leave a link in the description so you can follow right along. So we got some pretty cool examples, so let's get started. Alright, so to start off, let's go over some of the settings of CC Radial Blur. For this example, we'll be using our assets, our background and text, and we're just going to add them into a composition. Let's put CC Radial Blur on our text. It is under Blur and Sharpen, CC Radial Blur. Alright, so let's add that right onto our text. Now here we have our settings. So we have an amount, and if we turn that up, right away we're going to start noticing something. The blur only happens within the boundaries of this layer. That's not good. We don't want that. So what we're going to do real quick is just delete Radial Blur. So what we're going to do to fix this little situation that we have here is select our text layer, hit Shift Command C, and precompose this. And we'll call this text PC. And we want to make sure that we move all attributes into new composition. If we just leave all attributes, our composition will only be the size of this and will just be in the same position. So move all attributes. All right, let's hit OK. All right, so with our text PC selected, we can just double click on CC Radial Blur, and that will add it right on top. Hey, you might notice this is a different time from the rest of the video because, well, I didn't like how I did the demonstration of Radial Blur, so now we're back here doing it again. All right, so we have these four main settings. We have type, amount, quality, and center. So let's start off by taking the amount and turning that up to about 25. If we click on the actual effect here in our window and I click in the center, we can move the center point around. So real quickly, I'm going to move that up. All right, so now we're going to go through the actual settings here. For our type, we're actually going to just go straight down this list, starting at straight zoom. Now this will zoom it out from a center point going outwards. That direction and how much it spreads is dependent on where your center point is. All right, so let's bring this back up here. All right, so let's go to fading zoom. So this is going to be the same pretty much as straight zoom, except it's going to fade out as it goes along. And then lastly, under the, oh, Sheldon. And lastly, under these, no. And lastly, under the zoom category, we have centered zoom. Now that is going to zoom it out from the center and it will go towards this point as well as away from the point. All right, so let's take this center point and move it back to the center. Real quickly, as with any of these parameters, we can go to the center, we can right click on it and go to reset, and that'll bring it back to the center. All right, so let's do rotate. As the name suggests, it will rotate it in a direction. Now this is going clockwise. Let's go to the next one, which is scratch. Now what that's doing, it's basically doing what the centered zoom was doing, but with the rotation. So it's rotating this way and the opposite direction as well. Now rotate fading will do the same as fading zoom, but again with the rotation. So it fades out as it rotates along. All right, so that takes care of the type and the amount. So now quality. Now this is the quality of the blur. So let's turn this down, and the lowest it will go is 10. And you can see the stepping and the aliasing and all the nastiness. That's the lowest quality. It goes all the way up to 100. Honestly, with a lot of applications, you can get away with anywhere from 35 to 50. Obviously, the higher you have it up, the more computing power it's going to need. And of course, we covered the center point here, which is where the effect is going to be originating from. Now we can set the center point in a couple different ways. We can click on the actual point right here and drag it around, or we can move it around using these sliding numbers right here. And our third option is clicking on this little target right here, and you can actually select anywhere on the screen and it will bring the point to that area. And as with all the effects, we also have a general reset button, which will reset the entire thing. All right, now back to past me. All right, so that is CC Radial Blur. So let's get started on some different things that we can do with this. For our first example, we're going to be doing extruded 3D text. Now there's a number of ways you can go about doing this, but we're going to do it with CC Radial Blur. So what we're going to do is we're going to select our text PC and we're going to duplicate that. Now this is going to be the top version, text top. We'll rename it. And this is going to be the extrusion. So now that we have that done, let's turn off the visibility of this top layer. Actually, our text top, let's get rid of the radial blur. There we go. All right, so for our extrusion, let's keep the radial blur on that because we're going to be using that. But let's also add a fill. And that is under Generate Fill. And we're going to add that. We're going to add that below our radial blur. We're going to make this a dark brown. So if we turn on our text top, nothing really happens. So now we have our fill. Let's go into our radial blur and let's bring this up to maybe about 5. And we're going to set this to straight zoom. Now we're going to take our center point here and we're going to move it up and over pretty far, maybe to about there. So now what we can do is let's move that over a little bit more. Yeah, something like that. All right, so now if you've seen the fast box blur, you know that example where we crunched the alpha channel to create a more blobby look. Well, we can do something similar. So let's go to levels. Let's add that to our extrusion. Let's go to alpha channel. And let's crunch this in. And now we have an extruded text. Pretty simple. And you can adjust this to, kind of fit however you want. I think that should be fine. Let's darken this a little bit. Yeah, something like that. Now something else we can do, let's turn off this layer. Let's duplicate our text top again, and let's bring this down below. And we're going to call this shadow. So on top of this, we're going to add our radial blur. Let's double click, add that right on top. And we can kind of bring this over to maybe like 19 or 20 for now. Let's set this to fading zoom. And also let's add a fill. Generate fill. Let's add that on top. And let's actually bring that below our CC Radial Blur. Let's select maybe the darkest blue over here. And maybe darken that down a little bit more. There we go. So we're going to create more of a shadow color, and we want it to kind of match the color of our background a little bit. So now what we can do is take our center and let's kind of move this down. So let's select our radial blur in the effects panel so that we can access our little center point. And I'm going to bring this up while holding shift. That will bring it straight up. Now, the further you bring this up, the straighter the shadow will point down. So that's all going to depend on how you want it to look. So let's bring it way up there. And we can even bring down the amount. So let's set that to something like 7. Maybe we can even move this up even more. But yeah, the higher you bring it up, the straighter your shadows are going to go down. But yep, there we go. A nice simple little shadow that we can just create pretty quickly. So we've created an extrusion and we've created a shadow. Now what else can we do? Well, let's create a new composition. We can go over to our project window and select on new composition here. And we're going to call this energy 1920 by 1080, 23, blah, blah, blah. You can make it whatever you want. All right, 6 seconds we're going to do, and we're going to hit OK. So now we have our new composition here. Let's fit this up to 100%. And let's right click down in here, go to new, solid. This is 1920 by 440. That is not correct. So we can just hit the make comp size. There we go. And the color isn't going to really matter. So let's hit OK. And let's add a fractal noise, which is under noise and grain, fractal noise. And I want more of an energy type thing. So we'll go with dynamic progressive and we'll switch this to inverted. Maybe bring down the size a little bit. And I think we'll leave it at that, except we're going to add some motion to this with an evolution. So we can Alt-click on the stopwatch. And then down here, we can type in time times 300. Yeah, something pretty quick and energetic. And we can add a semicolon at the end. So we can hit enter on the number pad if you have that. If you don't, you can just click outside of the layer and that will close it up. All right, so we have our solid. Now let's create just a random mask. We're just gonna have some kind of ball of energy. So let's hit F on the keyboard to bring up the feathering. And let's bring up the feather. And we're gonna set the blending mode in our fractal noise to none. That'll fix up the edges a little bit. On second thought, I want to bring the scale back up to 100. So now that we have that set up, let's pre-compose this and move all attributes, hit OK. And to add more motion, actually, let's go back in here and let's add a turbulent displace. That is under distort, turbulent displace. Let's add that, and let's add that below our fractal noise. Let's bring down the size maybe a little bit. Set the complexity to 2, just get a little bit of motion in there. And we're going to Alt-click on the stopwatch. We're going to type in time times 150. So now we just have a little bit more motion. All right, so let's go back to our energy comp. Let's take our medium, let's call this energy ball. Let's take our energy ball and let's duplicate that by hitting Command D. And what we're going to add is a CC Radial Blur. All right, let's add our CC Radial Blur to our energy ball 2. And these are gonna be the rays. So let's set this to fading zoom. And let's just, there we go. Something like this, right? And then we can set the blending mode of our rays to be like screen or something. Maybe bring that up even more, 200-ish. All right, so now we have this kind of like energy rays shooting out. And it's using the lightness of our fractal noise to create that. Now, the cool thing is you can animate the center. Let's go back, hit U on the keyboard to bring up our keyframes. And yep, we're at the first frame. And let's just move that over to the right side. This alone can have so many applications. Light shining through like a foggy room kind of thing. There's so much stuff you can do with this. In fact, we did something very similar not that long ago with our Aurora Borealis tutorial. Go check that out if you haven't seen it. That was a good one. All right, and also a little side note, a future video that we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing a title sequence of The Thing. Not the crappy one, because that has a really cool title sequence that is actually done practically, and we're going to be showing you how it's done and how you can do it yourself. Yeah. So I'm actually looking forward to that tutorial. That's going to be fun. So now we have our shameless self-promotion and our third example out of the way. Let's create our fourth example. Let's jump into Hyperspace. All right, so for this one, this is going to require a little bit of setup, but let's get it done. All right, so let's create a new composition. We'll make this 8 seconds long, and we're going to call this Hyperspace. Jump. Jummy. All right, so let's hit OK. And what we're going to do is set up our star field first. So what we need to do is create a new solid, and we're going to make this black. So this is going to be the background. So we'll call this BG for background. Then what we can do is just duplicate this by Command D. Let's change this to stars. And we've used this effect before. It's CC Starburst. And the color of the stars comes from the color of your solid that you put it on top of. So we need to change this to a white. So let's hit Shift Command Y to bring up our solid settings. And let's just bring this up to white. There we go. So now we have our stars and our background. Let's go into effects and presets and let's type in Starburst. Is it one word? No. All right, so that's under Simulation, CC Starburst. Let's add that right onto our stars. And let's bring down the size a bit. Maybe bring down the grid spacing. Bring up the scatter maybe a little bit. Oh no. Speed, we're going to set to 0. And actually, I do want the stars to be a little bit bigger, just so we can see what we're doing. Maybe bring up the scatter so we have some more variation. And we could probably bring up the grid spacing as well. Yeah, we're gonna need to be able to see what we're actually doing for the tutorial purposes. But you can make your stars whatever size you want. All right, so let's take our stars and let's pre-compose that. Shift Command C, or we can just right click, go to pre-compose, and we'll call this stars PC. Now let's go in and add some color to our stars. So let's add a new adjustment layer, and we're gonna do a 4-color gradient. That is under Generate 4-color gradient. Let's add that right onto our adjustment layer. And right away we have some coloring going on. So let's make these a little more pale, maybe a little less green like that, you know. Let's add some yellows in there. Let's bring we got some pinkish colors. We got some blue hue. Let's just make different colors, you know. It's a little subtle, but that's fine. That's what we want. All right, so now that we have some little coloring on our stars, it just makes things a little more interesting, you know? Let's add our CC Radial Blur. So let's add that to our stars PC. Now this hyperspace jump look is all about timing, really. What we want to do here is maybe at 1 second, let's add a keyframe on the amount and set this to straight zoom. And let's hit U on the keyboard to bring up our keyframes. And let's go to 2 seconds. And let's just bring that up. Now something happened. Our stars disappeared. What we're going to need to do is take our levels again, or take A levels. So let's add our levels. Go down to alpha. And let's crunch that in just a bit. Maybe something like that. All right, so let's take this first keyframe here, right click on it, go to keyframe assistant, and we're going to do easy ease out. So that way it will ease out of that animation and then build up speed as it gets to here. Now, another thing that we need to fix here is we can kind of see the stepping of our stars, of our zoom. So let's bring the quality up to maybe 75. All right, so now we got to add some other effects to really sell this thing. So the first thing we're going to add is a new adjustment layer. And here's where we get some cool effects going in. We're going to add an optics compensation. We're going to just add that onto our adjustment layer, and we're going to rename this to distortion. Now the cool thing, if we start bringing this up and then change this reverse lens distortion, if we turn that on, what we're doing is we're stretching everything. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to go to 2 seconds, and we're going to set our field of view to be 150, right? And then we're going to click on the stopwatch to create a keyframe. Let's hit U to bring up our keyframe. Let's go to about half a frame here, or half a second, 12 frames. And let's set this to 0. Boom. And we're going to do the same thing we did with this. We're going to right click, ease out. Now this is going to be a little bit subtle, but it's going to add a lot of interest to our motion here. Now if you're noticing, it's kind of, here, let's turn this off. Rather than the CC Radial Blur just kind of shooting out, you know, evenly on all the stars, what we're doing with this distortion is we're kind of warping. So you'll notice that the edges are going to move in towards you before the center. But you can see how it's warping on the sides first, and then boom. So another thing that we want to do is add more motion to our stars. Now at the beginning, we set the speed of our starburst to be at 0. What we're going to do now is animate that. So we need to remember at 2 seconds is when our animation is completed right here. So we just need to remember that. So if we go into our stars PC, and what I'm going to do to make this easier is I'm going to lift this up a little bit. I'm going to take this, I'm going to drag it down till it enters into this bottom section. So that way we can see our keyframes up here and our keyframes down here, or whatever we're working on down here. So let's go to our hyperspace jump and let's lock this into place. All right, so now that we have that locked up, let's go to let's start moving the stars maybe about here. I don't know. We'll try that for now. All right, so let's go into our stars layer down in our stars PC. And let's add a keyframe on our speed. Let's hit U so we can open that up and see our keyframe. It's down here. Now let's go to 2 seconds and we're going to change the speed to be 2. So that way the stars are moving. And as with the other examples, let's take the keyframe assistant, go to easy ease out. Now let's readjust some of these settings here on our stars. Go to grid spacing, maybe turn that down. Let's get more stars in here. Let's turn down the scattering to maybe about 150. Whoa! And turn down the size. Let's see what that looks like. All zoomies. We got some more zoomies. All right, so the whole thing with this, it's very timing dependent. Yeah, the thing that took the most was just getting the timing of everything down. That took the longest. And it looks pretty good. I like it. You know, you can adjust everything depending on how long you want your star streaks to be. But as far as timing goes, I think it's the most important to have your distortion coming up first, and then the radial blur to grow the stars, and then slightly after that, the speed starts picking up so that the stars start moving. And you'll get this really cool, like, warping effect. Whoosh! So if you want to do a Star Wars movie, hey, Chewbacca, let's go into hyperspace. But yeah, that's it for this episode of the many uses of CC Radial Blur. If you liked what you saw, don't forget to subscribe, maybe hit the like button, ring the bell with the subscribe button too. That helps out, and you're going to be able to see all the different tutorials that we release come right up in your notifications. Unless it doesn't, because sometimes YouTube just says, yeah, I'm not going to let you know about this video. Yeah, so just make sure you don't miss all the cool tutorials that we're going to be doing. We're going to be doing some more many uses of, but then we also got a lot of other things coming up. We're not just going to be doing many uses. We're going to be doing some more project-based tutorials. All right, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.